Hi, I'm Gerry Divino. I'm the CEO and founder of Amatera Solar Technology Inc. We've installed over 1,558 solar panels in 62 locations all over Luzon since 2014. But in this house, I'll show you the off-grid solar power system that we did. So this is what you call a charge controller. This one charges the lithium battery pack here in this box. So right now, it has been able to charge and store 10 ampere hours. And the battery is now at 16.8 volts, 99%. And I'll show you inside. It can power the lights inside our kitchen. So I'll turn this on. These are DC lights. There. So these are 4 lights of 3 watts each. And then over here, in our living room, there's also 4 more lights. So in the next video, we'll be showing you how to design an off-grid solar power system that can power your lights too. To design an off-grid solar power system, you need 3 major components. These are the solar panel, the charge controller, and of course the battery where you store the energy from the sun. At the end of this video training, you'll be able to know how big a solar panel you need, what kind of solar charge controller to choose, and how big a battery you need to store energy so that you can power all your lights in your house. We won't be telling you which solar panel to choose or what kind of technology. We'll just tell you how big in terms of watts. It's the same with the battery. It's up to you which battery you want to use, but we'll tell you how much energy it should be able to store. Okay, so let's start. You start off by knowing what your load profile is. So for example, you want to light up a room with 4 lights of 5 watts each. You would need 5 watts times 4 is equal to 20 watts. Watts is the unit for power, and it gives you a measure of how much electricity you need. In electrical terms, it's equal to volts times amperes. But for now, know that each light consumes 5 watts. And you need 4 lights, so 20 watts is needed so that you have a well-lighted house. Next is you have to ask how long will you use those lights. So for this case, we'll settle on 12 hours. So let's say you want to use the lights from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. So that's 12 hours. 20 watts times 12 hours equals to 240 watt hours. That's the amount of energy you need to power those lights. And whether it's coming from solar or whether it's coming from your utility company, such as Meralco, 240 watt hours is the amount of energy that you need to run those lights. So 240 watt hours, what do we do with that? We now have a figures to determine how big a battery you need. From watt hours, we convert it to volt ampere hours. 1 watt is equal to 1 volt ampere in electrical terms. So looking at the equation, 240 volt ampere hours, you need to divide it by the system voltage of the battery, which in this case, we decided to be 12 volts, to get the ampere hours. The ampere hours is the measure of the amount of energy that a battery can store and the major specification that you need to determine how big a battery you need. So in this case, 240 volt ampere hours divided by 12 volts is equal to 20 ampere hours. Now, not all batteries will be able to discharge 100% of its capacity. Specifically for lead-acid batteries, you can only discharge 50%. More than that, you severely degrade the lifetime of the battery. For example, if you choose to discharge 80% of a lead acid battery's capacity, you will decrease the lifetime of the battery such that you can only use it for less than 1 year. If you use only 30%, you can lengthen the lifetime, but you won't be maximizing its use. So the general rule of thumb is to discharge a lead acid battery up to 50% only. So from the previous computation of 20 ampere hours, we need to add another 20 ampere hours. That would give us 40 ampere hours of storage. Since there's no readily available battery at 40 ampere hours, we will choose 50 ampere hours. And then, considering that we also have the rainy season in the Philippines, we also need to add 1 day of autonomy or 1 day backup. So that means even if it's rainy for 1 day, you will still have enough energy stored to power your lights. That means we have to double the capacity again from 50 to 100 AH. So 100 ampere hours is the final rating that we will choose for the battery that will power our 4 lights. So that's for the battery. Next will be the solar panel. How do we size the solar panel? So here we show 2 ways. Remember, we computed for 20 ampere hours. That's the amount of energy in terms of ampere hours that we need to power the 4 lights. It's also the amount of energy that we need to store at least into the batteries. So depending on the area where you are located, you can divide it by the number of hours that the sun is effectively up. We know that the sun is up from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., but in solar terms, the sun doesn't have the same irradiance during those times. So we normally average it between 3 to 5 hours. So we'll take the lower end, which is 3 hours. So 20 ampere hours divided by 3, and you get around 6.7 amperes. If you want to go by watt hours, 240 watt hours divided by 3 hours will be equal to 80 watts. So why the difference? In the first case, the 20 ampere hours divided by 3 gives the amount of current that you need to sustain for an average of 3 hours. In the second case, the 80 watts gives the amount of power that you need to sustain for 3 hours. Now for the second case, it's a bit misleading because 80 watts cannot actually give that size of current to give you 20 ampere hours within 1 day, even if it's very sunny. So at Amatera Solar, we design off-grid systems based on the current that's needed. So in the end, we will be needing a 250 watt panel with a peak power current of 8 amperes. 80 watts or 100 watt panel will not be able to give that. Their maximum power current is just around 5 to 6 amps. So 250 watts will be the minimum for this design. And for the final step in deciding the components for the system, we have to decide what kind of charge controller to use. Normally, the lower end charge controllers, they're called PWM controllers or pulse width modulated controllers. You can divide them into 3 categories. There's 10 amperes, 20 amperes, and 30 amperes. So that's the maximum amount of current that you can get from the panel or that you can give out as a load or charge the battery. So since the peak power current is 8 amps, we could use 10 amperes, but there's only a very small margin of 2 amperes before we damage the charge controller. So if you want to be safe, pay a little more and get the 20 amp version. But in the end, considering all the losses, we've tested it and 10 amperes will do. So for the final system, you will need a solar panel with a greater than 250 watt rating, with a peak power current of 8 amperes or bigger. You will need a battery rated at 100 ampere hours, 12 volts, and you would need a charge controller rated at 10 amperes. Okay, so these are the 5 steps in doing an off-grid design for your lights. Number 1, get your load profile. How many lights do you need? How many watts does each light bulb or LED bulb consume? If you're not sure, you can look at the labels before you buy. And number 2, get the number of hours you will use the lights. Will it be 6? Will it be 3 hours? Will it be 12 hours? From there, you can compute or determine the number of watt hours of energy that you need to store inside the battery and generate from solar. Number 3, from the watt hours, compute for the ampere hours that is needed for battery storage. And based on that ampere hours, get the minimum solar panel rating that you need to charge the battery. And then finally, determine the charge controller rating. And you just have to choose between 3 for small systems, 10, 20, or 30. Okay, so there are other considerations. Like in this case, we don't use a DC to AC inverter. So we assume for lower cost that we will be using LED lights that can be DC powered. So that saves on cost. And then secondly, we also didn't discuss how big a wire you need. So you don't want to undersize the wire, so it will be a fire hazard. And you don't want to oversize it because you don't want to spend unnecessarily. So these are the things we discuss in our solar workshop. Follow us on Facebook for more information.